Welcome to the Conshy Coaching Podcast, where we take the concepts of mindset and energy leadership coaching and make them real so that you can get out of your own way, beat the burnout, and create a life and career that you love. I'm your host, Jenn Masse. Hello, and welcome to episode 10 of the Conshy Coaching Podcast. When I first started podcasting, I wasn't sure what to expect and if I'd even like it. But 10 episodes in, and I'm learning that I love it. I love having yet another platform to educate and empower you to cultivate resilience, master transitions, and become a leader of your own life. Candidly, my husband also loves it because now I get all of my extroverted energy out through talking to you and my guests, which gives his introverted soul a break. While my last 6 episodes have had guests, for episode 10, I'm coming at you solo. And I'm very excited about what I've outlined for you today because I'll be talking about acceptance, making conscious choices, being vulnerable, and a whole bunch of other stuff in the middle. Now, you know that we can't talk about vulnerability without dropping a lot of Brene Brown references. So when we get there, just bear with me. And if you haven't read any of her books, watched her Netflix special, or caught her new podcast, Unlocking Us, go check her out. Embodying Brene Brown's message about being vulnerable and owning our worthiness is what fueled me to own my decision of following my dream, starting my own business, and honestly, her content is just complete gold for anyone who wants to show up as a wholehearted being and as their authentic self. So now that I've got my fangirlness out of the way, let's dive in to talking about acceptance and making conscious choices. When we think about acceptance, we first need to be aware of who we are and our perceptions of the situation that we're in. So taking time to reflect on our needs, our values, and our perceptions is critical to being vulnerable because if you're not aware of who you are and the situation you're in, you can't accept it, which means you can't show up as you are. Recently, in episodes 6, 7, and 8, my guests and I focused on talking about raising awareness of your thought patterns, needs, and values. So if you're new to my show, double back and listen to those episodes and check out my recent blog post for some tips on how to cultivate resilience. Once you're set on the awareness piece, and awareness is really a lifelong exercise and practice. It's something we have to do every day. It's not like you can raise awareness once and think you're set. So awareness is a daily practice. But once you have the majority of the awareness work done, especially right now during the pandemic, of understanding what is triggering you and triggering your emotions, you can start to step into acceptance. And acceptance is where the real work and practice starts to kick in. And I personally believe that accepting who we are as individuals and the situation that we're in is the first true step to being vulnerable. Accepting yourself and your current situation allows you to remain present in the moment and engage all of your energy into whatever it is that you're doing, so that you can maximize your chances for doing well and maximize your potential for success. When you think about the levels of energy that I introduced in episode 2, acceptance starts to show up in level 3. It's when you start to transition out of the state of conflict, or level 2, which is I wish things were different, and recognize that you accept things for what they are and start to rationalize what it is that you can actually control in the moment. So just as a refresh, level 1 is the world is too heavy, the weight is too heavy, I'm going to curl up under a rock and just hope that it goes away. Level 2 is that state of conflict and frustration because life isn't the way that you want it. And level 3 is when you start to accept life for what it is and take control back. You start realizing that you have control over the moment and you can control your own actions and you can change your destiny. As you then move up in the energy levels is when you start recognizing opportunity, connecting with others, finding joy, and finding happiness. But acceptance truly starts in level 3, when you can transition out of the trauma and experiencing life for what it is. So let's talk about how this relates to the stay-at-home order that we're all living in right now. I'm going to be honest. the initial quarantine and stay-at-home policies, they were really tough for me in the beginning. And I've talked about this on some of my previous episodes, but I was longing to hug my friends, go for hikes, and I was angry because I felt like it was taken away from me. I felt like it was a personal attack, which, let's be honest, it wasn't. Every single decision that's being made right now is to support the broader community. And after a few days of allowing myself to really feel the emotions and journaling to raise awareness about why I was being triggered, allowed me to finally accept that the stay-at-home policy is here to stay for a while. So rather than thinking like, oh man, like I really want this to end tomorrow, it's like, okay, cool, this is going to be here for a while. So what can I do? What can I do to choose my experience? What can I do to create my own reality and a reality that works for me? So things like accepting that my husband will randomly come upstairs and distract me from when I'm finally finding my flow. In the past, he would go to work and I would have the house to myself. So this new distraction is something that I have to accept and embody and learn to set boundaries so that he knows when he can and can't come upstairs. Like, for example, right now, he knows that I'm recording a podcast, so he knows that upstairs and distractions are off limits. It also goes as far as accepting that all of the amazing live workouts that studios are bringing to you, those didn't work for me. I was actually getting angry at the fact that I was watching a live class, but I wasn't there with the instructor and with my peers. So rather than fighting it and forcing it to happen, I dug out my Nintendo Wii Fit and I've been doing those workouts in the basement because that worked for me. So the acceptance and ability to move on is so important to cultivating your existence and your strength and your experience. And then, there's the birthdays, right? There's the quarantine birthdays. My nephew had a quarantine birthday. My best friend had a quarantine birthday. And while not ideal, I can honestly say that yesterday doing a car parade for my friend Kelly's birthday was the funnest thing, most fun, whatever the correct English is for that. It was so fun to organize a group of 10 cars. We, social distance, we were safe, we wore gloves, we wore masks, but everybody had mimosas. We had all the cars line up, and seeing the look on her face was so much better than any other birthday that we probably could have done outside of quarantine, where we would have gone to dinner, had the same conversation. And I think that comes from accepting where we are in the life that we're living in right now and tapping into creativity. And you can't tap into creativity if you're in survival mode. Acceptance moves you into a higher energy level that allows you to tap into that creativity. So there's just a lot of freedom that's going on right now once you accept where you are. We have the ability to create our own rules and find new ways to fulfill our needs. And as I mentioned in episode 8, having needs and being needy doesn't make you weak. In fact, it's the opposite. If you understand your needs and you vocalize your needs, you are strong. You can only be strong if you understand your needs and actively seek ways to fulfill them. So just keep that in mind, that through all of this, through accepting what this new reality is and accepting that we get to create our own rule books, is accepting that our needs are changing and it's up to us to understand what those needs are so that we can fulfill our needs and align to our core values and share our talents with the world. It's understanding these new needs that will allow us to cultivate resilience. So I want you to consider that. What would change for you if you truly accepted the environment that we're living in right now? And I want to make the distinction that when I say accepting the environment that we're in right now, accepting the stay-at-home policy, accepting that life is different, I don't mean settling. Settling means you're taking it for what it is and you're upset and you're in conflict and you're just waiting for it to go back to normal. Settling is survival. Accepting is what allows you to move forward. So what will change for you if you truly accept the stay-at-home orders? Accept that you have far more on your plate, spiritual, mentally, and emotionally, than you ever thought possible. And accepting that not only are you surviving, but you're thriving right now. You're thriving by coming up with new ways to stay entertained daily, new ways to find pantry items that you've never cooked with before, new ways to entertain your family, and just new ways of navigating life and creating new routines that you've never had to create before because of this change and transition in our life. What would change for you if you truly accepted that you're thriving and you have the ability to thrive in this environment? What if we stopped the comparison game to our old life and stopped wishing for the future to come sooner? And again, accepted the current present situation for what it is. What if we stopped hiding behind the past and the future and truly thrived in the current moment? A lot of my friends and a lot of my clients who are trying to maintain their full-time jobs while working from home, a lot of them have kids, a lot of them live in small studio apartments or cramped spaces and are now balancing working full-time with a spouse, with their children needing to go to school. And a lot of them are saying, when I ask how are they doing, it's like, I'm doing well, but I'm not nearly as productive as I was, and that bothers me. And whether or not these people have spouses or children that they're adding onto their daily mixture, I always respond with the same question. How can you be? How can you compare your current productivity to the productivity you once had in an office environment, to the productivity pre-pandemic when you didn't have all these additional stresses and considerations to deal with on a daily basis, when you could run into a grocery store without thinking twice? Now it's, do I have my mask? Do I have my list? Do I have my gloves? What do I actually need? Do I have to go right now? There's so much more that is draining our energy when it comes to our mental influencer, which is the clarity of what's going on right now. Our environmental influencer is being completely thrown out of whack because our environment isn't what we're used to, and we're still learning how to make it work for us. Our social influencer is out of whack, and it's draining us because our social interaction has changed. Our energy is being drained in so many ways from this pandemic that it's no wonder we're not as productive as we used to be. And our definition of productivity has changed, and it needs to change because our definition is based on old standards and old rules. And nearly every single rule that we've lived by leading up to this pandemic has changed. Like I said, we have to strategically plan our shopping trips now. We have to change the way we work, the way our kids go to school, the way we communicate with our loved ones. We need to think twice before we head into a public space. So why don't we give ourselves the permission to think twice about our productivity standard? I personally believe that as a society, we're afraid to challenge this productivity standard because in our old world, we hid behind the hustle. We used the hustle as a shield so that we never had to face our thoughts or our emotions. As a collective culture, we thrive on the idea that if we stay busy enough, the truth of our lives and the impacts of our decisions won't catch up to us. And let's face it, we can't hide behind the hustle with the pandemic. Even when we try to fill our days, we're left with voids, time to fill. And it's making us face our feelings, emotions, and reality. It's making us feel a lot more vulnerable than usual. Rather than hiding and bypassing our emotions, let's feel them. Let's be vulnerable. Let's ask for help and practice having hope. Let's practice loving ourselves in the way that we deserve to be loved. Because if we fill our days and the voids with negative self-talk and self-doubt, we're being a disservice to ourselves. And this whole episode is really to empower you to step into those voids and step into the awareness and acceptance piece so that you can make conscious choices to love yourself and to create a reality and a script and a storyline that works for you. So that when you step out of this pandemic and they eventually lift the stay-at-home work orders, you can go out and face whatever the new normal looks like with more strength and resilience than you've ever had before. So I want to touch on self-love for a moment. As a culture, we often tie our self-love and self-worth to our self-efficacy. And the result is that we look for validation of our self-love from others. But self-love is not the same as self-efficacy. Let me repeat that. Self-love is not the same as self-efficacy. Self-love is much, much deeper. It is based on unconditional acceptance of who we are at our core. It's based on truly understanding, owning, and fulfilling our core needs and our core values and leaning into our core talents without any traces of self-judgment. It's about moving away from the thoughts of what will other people think to the complete belief of the statement, I am enough. We need to own our worthiness to truly embody self-love. The moment we can make eye contact with ourselves in a mirror and say, I love you, without any traces of doubt or judgment, is the moment that we can truly own that worthiness and truly own the belief that I am enough. And let me tell you, that is hard. And it's hard because it's vulnerable. We have been trained to second guess, to measure up to other people's standards, to wear an armor of perfectionism. And as Brene Brown points out in Daring Greatly, perfectionism is a 20-ton shield that we lug around, thinking that it will protect us, when in fact, it's the thing that's preventing us from being seen. Perfectionism is a self-destructive and an addictive belief system that fuels the primary thought, if I look perfect and I do everything perfectly, I can avoid or minimize the painful feelings of shame, judgment, and blame. And here's the thing, perfectionism is judgment. Perfectionism is your personal judgment of what you think other people want. When, let's be honest, we have no idea what other people want. As a society, we are terrible at communicating expectations to each other. We're terrible at communicating expectations because most of the time we don't actually understand our expectations. So to not understand them and then try to communicate them to somebody else, game over. So if you flip that on its head, we're not getting clear expectations communicated to us. So our goal of being perfect to minimize those icky feelings, it's a personal judgment of what we think the other person wants and a personal judgment that we're not good enough as we are. So that's icky. I personally like that word, icky. Scientific term, guys. But it's icky to not feel like you're good enough. And it's icky to feel like you need to be perfect to put yourself out there. And it hurts a lot more because when you eventually put yourself out there and inevitably feel judged, it's self-destructive because then it validates that I'm not good enough. So what can we do to combat the icky feelings that come with vulnerability of not being perfect and the vulnerability of loving ourselves and the vulnerability of living in the moment? First, we can accept the feelings and emotions that come with it. Like I mentioned earlier, the awareness and understanding of what is triggering the emotions is step 1. Acceptance is step 2, and conscious choice is step 3. So once you're aware of what is triggering you and accept that those feelings will happen when you are vulnerable, the conscious choice is to actively work on flipping your personal thoughts and beliefs so you can create a script and a storyline that works for you. One of my most popular speaking engagements talks about minimizing stress so that we can maximize our potential in the 6 main areas of influence in our life. In this talk, I explain how the trigger or the stimuli is the same. It's our personal perception of the stimuli or trigger that will determine if we will have a stress reaction or a success response. Awareness of our triggers provide us the ability to consciously choose and accept our response. So when you think about the pandemic and the stay-at-home orders, the trigger is the same for everybody. However, if you look around the community, the responses are much different. Many people are living in fear and refusing to leave their homes. Some are living in conflict and pointing fingers at the people who are either out and about, not wearing masks, and some people are actively protesting the government for shutting down businesses to keep the broader community safe. And others seem to be accepting the stay-at-home and physical distancing requirements in stride. They're wearing their masks, they're social distancing, and they are continuing with life as if nothing is fazing them. They appear happy and joyful, and they're finding opportunity. And that in itself can cause conflict in some people. Seeing people be happy and in flow while we are personally in conflict typically adds to more conflict because we are angry that we can't feel the same way. But let's talk about that last group. Let's talk about that group that's in flow. They are likely in flow and able to accept what is and continue with life and find opportunity because at some point they have done the work to understand what's happening inside them. They've done the inner work to cultivate resilience, and they've trained themselves to flip the script so that they can look for the sunshine that is causing the shadows. And as a society, we're going through a collective trauma. Abrupt transition isn't easy for anyone, and it's through resilience that we can collectively look for the sunshine and move on, that we can transition from trauma to survival to thrival. I don't know if thrival is a word. Run with it if it's not. So this fact is just crazy to me. In a webinar that was led by Dr. Sandra Formica, a PhD who studies happiness and resilience, it was stated that during non-pandemic times, scientists found that of the 50 to 80,000 thoughts humans have per day, 65 to 85% of them are negative by default. Let me just pause on that for a second. Humans have 50 to 80,000 thoughts per day. 65 to 85% of those thoughts are negative by default. That means by the time you're 40, you will have had 1 billion negative thoughts in your life. This is why midlife crises happen, because we have so many default negative thoughts going on. It was also stated that because of the increased stress, anxiety, and fear that is increasing the percent of default negative thoughts per day right now, there will likely be a 50% increase in individuals with mental and emotional troubles when this pandemic is over. My mom used to always tell my brother, David, don't be a statistic. It was usually directed at his careless behavior when he'd go mountain biking with his buddies as kids, or when he started drinking when he got to college. And honestly, I have no idea what she's referring to now because I don't overhear those conversations, but guaranteed, once in a while, she still says, David, don't be a statistic. And I don't want you to be a statistic. That's why I coach. I coach and I have this podcast and I write my blogs because I want to empower you to cultivate resilience so that you can do everything in your power to not be a statistic. If we're busy hiding behind the shield of perfectionism and playing the comparison game on how we see everybody else living their lives right now on social media and fueling the negative self-talk about why we're not good enough to handle this pandemic, then we're only doing ourselves a disservice. We are preventing ourselves from owning our worthiness, and we're aligning ourselves to be a statistic. So if you don't want to be one of those people who walks out of this pandemic with mental or emotional struggles, then you need to choose to change your storyline. You need to consciously choose to own your worthiness and accept that you are doing the best that you can. You need to choose to accept that your best might look different than somebody else's best. And that's okay. In order to thrive and move out of this pandemic, we need to choose to move out of the trauma stress response and consciously choose to approach it with a higher level of energy. As a mindset and energy leadership coach, I help my clients raise awareness to their thoughts and perceptions so that they can actively practice flipping the script and choosing positive thoughts that better serve them. So if you take that and translate it to yourself, instead of the game of perfectionism and the comparison game, what would change if you knew that you were enough and you flipped your storyline to know that you were enough? So again, I probably can't repeat this enough. The first step is awareness. If you're not aware of why your stress and emotions are being triggered right now, take the time to journal and reflect. It's often not the first reason that you write down either. So if you are feeling emotions and you don't understand the emotions that are being triggered for you right now, grab a journal and start word vomiting onto a page. Just start writing whatever comes to you. Personally, I find that by the second page of writing, I start to move from my active thoughts into my subconscious. And that's where I can truly process what's going on at a deeper level. This means being vulnerable. This means feeling your emotions and taking off the mask. Journaling is your safe place. Writing your thoughts in a journal is safe because it's just you and your words. And if you don't want to share them with anybody, you don't need to share them with anybody. But it gives you a safe place to really dig into your subconscious and start to understand, why is it that you're being triggered? As women, we tend to shoulder the emotions of our families. And we think that by putting on a face of bravery and strength, and we think that by not showing our emotions, we are protecting our family. But a lot of times, it's actually better to show our family our true colors. There's a couple reasons for this. The first reason is because by showing that we have emotions, it validates the fact that they have emotions. The second thing is that we can't be brave without being vulnerable. And this concept comes straight from Brene Brown. But basically, the only time you can truly be brave and courageous and fight is to fight for something you care so deeply about that you're afraid of losing it. And that fear of losing something is vulnerability. And vulnerability is icky, and we've talked about that. But choosing to be vulnerable and choosing to feel and understand our emotions and show our emotions will make us stronger. And it's okay to ask for help. Another famous Brene Brown quote is, "We don't have to do it all alone. We were never meant to." I think that quote is so completely beautiful because I know personally, I always thought asking for help was a weakness. And I know that a lot of my clients also think it's a weakness. And I have talked to them about that. And in our conversations, they have realized that it is in the times that they have asked for help that they've truly thrived because they were able to put their ego aside and accept that there was a community out there willing to build them up and make them stronger. And there's a concept called sistering in carpentry, which I think is absolutely beautiful. Sistering is when you add additional support to a joint that is starting to cave from the weight above. The same concept applies to real life. If the weight starts to get too heavy, reach out to your sisters, your support network, your friends, your coach, your therapist, your family, your brothers, whoever you look to for your support network, reach out to them and ask for help. Build your tribe of sisters to support you in your journey of vulnerability and strength, and allow them to give you hope. And I think hope is a really interesting topic. The late C.R. Snyder, who was an American psychologist with a specialty in positive psychology, explained that hope isn't an emotion. It's a way of thinking. Hope is a cognitive process. Emotions play a supporting role, But hope is a thought process made up of goals, pathways, and agency. We have the ability to create hope by setting realistic goals and having a clear vision by accepting where we are in the present moment. We're able to fuel hope by figuring out how to achieve those goals, including the ability to be flexible and develop alternate ways of achieving the goal when roadblocks arise. And we're able to solidify hope by believing in ourselves and owning our worthiness. As a coach, I give my clients hope. And through this podcast, I give you hope. Through coaching, I help people set goals, challenge their expectations, and come up with creative plans to achieve their goals. And through the 10 disciplines of energy leadership, I empower people to believe in themselves. And I truly believe that by you listening to this podcast, you are also being empowered to have hope and to take what you're learning to create your own goals and fuel hope by achieving those goals and creating action plans by believing in yourself. And hope is learned. It comes from learning that we are strong enough to survive. It comes from reflecting on our past, accepting the present, and believing in our vision for the future, and believing that we have what it takes to cultivate that vision of the future. And what we focus on expands. So if we focus on having hope and creating our future, it will manifest itself in the way that we believe that it will, which is where the power of positive self-talk comes in. Because if we doubt ourselves and we doubt our future and our ability to achieve that goal, then we will cultivate a future of doubt. But if we fully own our worthiness and have the vulnerability to be brave enough to go chase those dreams, we will achieve those dreams. So I just took a look at the time. I know I'm kind of running long here, but there's 2 more topics that I'd like to hit on real quick. The first topic is goals. There are 2 different types of goals. As a society, we have been trained to set performance goals. Performance goals are you either succeed or you don't succeed. What if we changed the goal from winning to doing and from doing to being? Mastery goals, which is what I really encourage my clients to set, are process-oriented. Mastery goals focus on what can you learn and how can you grow, rather than just succeeding or failing. So I just want to explain kind of what this looks like in a real life pandemic example. The other day I was talking to my mom and she said that she was discouraged. And the coach in me and the daughter in me starts thinking about a gazillion reasons of why she could be discouraged. Is it because she can't go and see her father? Is it because she can't go grocery shopping? Is it because my dad is driving her crazy? Why is she discouraged? She was discouraged because she wanted to bake cookies and they didn't come out the way that she expected because they weren't perfect cookies. And as a daughter, I had to try really hard not to laugh because I was expecting the worst. And I was incredibly grateful that she was discouraged about cookies and not something else. But while we were chatting and she was hemming and hawing about her cookies not being perfect, we also talked about the fact that she set out to bake cookies. And while in her head and her expectations is she wanted to bake magazine-looking cookies, and she was discouraged because they weren't perfect cookies, as a coach, I kept reminding her the goal was to bake cookies, and she baked cookies. She succeeded. And it took a little bit to get through, which is common, because she sets really high standards for herself. And even though she rarely bakes, she really wanted those magazine cookies. But as we were talking and as we were brainstorming solutions about, okay, well, what can we learn? What do you think went wrong? What do you think you can try next? She was able to come up with new ideas and transition from being discouraged to being hopeful. Her batter came up to temperature. She took away the silpat sheet. I think she adjusted the oven temperature. And the batches that she baked later came out looking delicious. And she felt better about them. And I know we're talking about cookies, but this applies to life as well. Don't set out to be perfect, because perfect is a judgment. Just set out to do something and see what you can learn in the process. And because we're talking about cookies, I want to end with a final note about all of the baking that seems to be happening during this pandemic. Jennifer Loudon, who is the author of The Organized Life, writes, "Shadow comforts can take any form. It's not what you do, it's why you do it that makes the difference. You can eat a piece of chocolate as a holy wafer of sweetness, a real comfort. Or you can cram an entire chocolate bar into your mouth without even tasting it in a frantic attempt to soothe yourself, a shadow comfort." So the invitation by reading this quote to you is to have you think about the intention behind our choices and actions during this pandemic. Whether you are diving headfirst into TikTok or baking sourdough bread or any other new skill that you're trying, ask yourself, are we baking because we've always wanted to bake and this is a great opportunity to learn a new skill and avoid going to the grocery store? Or are we baking because everybody else is doing it and it's a great excuse not to sit down and reflect on what's truly going on at a deeper level? Are we using whatever new thing that we've come up with during this pandemic as a shield to protect us from our emotions? As Brene Brown questions in Daring Greatly, are the choices that we're making comforting and nourishing our spirit, or are they temporarily distracting us and depriving us from feeling vulnerability and difficult emotions? Ask yourself, are my choices leading to wholeheartedness, or do they leave me feeling empty and searching for more? If you reflect and realize that you are tapping into long-lost talents and that you are truly being nourished by whatever it is that you're doing right now to help you survive this pandemic, whether that's baking or dancing or TikToking, keep going and share those talents and positivities with the world. But if you reflect on these questions and realize that you are feeling empty and searching for more, and that you are doing whatever it is that you're doing as a band-aid to avoid feeling your emotions, please take time to reflect and journal on what is going on for you. Please reach out to your support network. Reach out to your sisters for help. And if you don't have a network, please get in touch with me. I am personally accepting clients, but I also have a large network of other coaches and therapists who I'm happy to refer you to if we are not a fit. I just want to make sure that you get the help that you need so that you can process what you are going through during this pandemic, so that you can walk out the other side with more resilience and strength than you ever thought possible. Bravery, strength, and vulnerability go hand in hand. Feeling your emotions and asking for help is not a weakness. It is a sign of strength. Daring greatly isn't about winning or losing. It's about having the courage to show up. It's about having the vulnerability to acknowledge that yes, you will be knocked down, but you will have the courage to get up again. And you will have the strength to own your worthiness and know that you can face whatever comes your way. So I ask you, when you think about this pandemic, the stay-at-home orders, and life after COVID-19, will you choose to accept things as they are right now and choose to be vulnerable so that you can create a life and career that you love when this is done? Will you choose to have the courage to own your worthiness and show up 100% unapologetically and authentically you? Because if you do, you'll never look back and regret it. There are no such things as regrets when you live a life that is authentically you. You will never regret saying and believing, I'm enough. I believe in you. Do you? That was episode 10 of the Conshy Coaching Podcast. If you would like to learn more about mindset and energy leadership coaching or cultivating resilience, please visit my website at www.conshycoaching.com. If you would like to download workbooks to support your journey to self-discovery, please check out my resources page at www.conshycoaching.com/resources. As always, if you like listening to the Conshy Coaching Podcast, please subscribe to my channel and share with a friend. You can also join my weekly email list so that you never miss an episode or a blog post. Thanks for listening, and I hope you have a wonderful day.